What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Filip Kis, the co-founder of SessionLab, and we speak about the results of the State of Facilitation report that SessionLab brought out and about facilitation in general. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back to be inspired. Filip, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's really great being here.
Yes. And I've been collaborating with SessionLab for such a long time. And you needed to release a report on the state of facilitation for me to invite you to the podcast. What a shame.
I think that's fine. I think as long as we are helpful in the background, we don't need the spotlight.
Yes, very humble of you to say that. And let me start with the same question that I ask every guest on the show. Would you call yourself a facilitator? And if so, since when?
That's a very interesting question for me, because I started SessionLab and this whole journey because I would say now I'm a facilitator and I was a facilitator. But when I did that, I did not know that I am and I was. So I would say my background in this area comes from training. I was doing a training in an NGO, and that's where we started thinking, since we were also I have a technical background and a lot of my colleagues back then had a technical background. So we were constantly thinking, okay, how can we make this process of training others in soft skills better supported with technology? Mm-hmm. And we had many ideas. One of them was something that later turned on to be SessionLab. At that time, I think, we talked about facilitation as part of what you need to be good at as a trainer. But I don't think I consider that as a label you would put on somebody. It was only much later, even after we started SessionLab. Actually, the product was not called SessionLab in the first couple of years. It was called Trained On. And only when we started getting more clients, more users, did we understood that facilitation is the keyword here, and that trainers are as well facilitators, but there are also many, many other types of facilitation and facilitators around. So yeah, I guess at that point I realized, okay, I was facilitator all that time as well, and I guess I am now. But I don't know exactly when was that switch that happened.
What a journey.
I realized this, yeah.
When was the switch then for SessionLab? And maybe for the audience who doesn't know SessionLab, it's an online agenda planning organizing tool. So maybe you want to explain actually what it is, but I'm such a big fan.
I'm curious first to hear how you would explain it, and I can add if I have any.
So for me, the best way to explain it is maybe by explaining what the pain is without using it. So I'm seeing so many facilitators designing their workshop plan in Excel. So every row would be a certain activity, and then they have the time in the first column, and then they realize, oh, actually we need to change the order, so they have to recalculate all the times, and they have to do all the calculation whether the time adds up to however long their session needs to be. And that's a nightmare. And SessionLab basically has all of this built in so that you can drag and drop your activities. There's a library of activities that you can use. You can choose your own ones, and it adds up all the minutes of all the activities and gives you the length of your session at the end. And you can add comments and links and everything. Yes. And even have a color code. So I have a color code whether something is a solo activity or large group activity or small group activity, or whether it's kind of input. And then I see whether my session is nicely balanced.
Exactly. I think you well described the features and the value that comes. And actually, the inspiration for the SessionLab was solving this problem of having Excel agendas all over and not being able to collaborate on them as well, and adjusting them in real time or when you're preparing, it was a mess. And I think now we went beyond just this problem of adjusting timing, because in this post-COVID world where there is a lot of online, I think collaborating through a digital platform to be able to better plan and deliver workshops, I think became quite important. And I think to summarize it, it's a collaborative platform for workshop design and delivery.
True. That's an aspect that I totally forgot. So I'm working with a group of 15 facilitators, maybe more, on a client project.
Mm-hmm.
And we all access the same agenda and can leave our comments after each session so that we can constantly improve it.
Yes.
And as I mentioned in the intro, you just released the first State of Facilitation report, where I think you collected inputs from over 1,000 facilitators from across the globe about facilitation.
Yeah.
And before we are getting into the results, I would be curious what got you to do that, because you just explained that initially your product wasn't for facilitators, or you didn't know that it was for facilitators. And now suddenly it's this, you become the spokes organization about the state of facilitation.
Yeah.
What made the difference? What was the journey? Yeah,
this was a good question. I think the shift from us realizing that we are focusing on facilitators now is already quite back. It was, I think, 6 years ago that we changed the name and focused more on facilitation, not only on training as we started. And I think very quickly we realized there is not a lot at that time. So I'm talking 6 years ago. There is not a lot of talk about facilitation online in any way. So we very quickly started blogging a lot about it, trying to use our own experience and sometimes collaborating with our clients to figure out what are the needs and what areas can we cover, both in terms of expanding the knowledge about facilitation and giving tips and just sharing. But that was in a way one-sided. It was our opinion or opinion of maybe a few other people or research that we could do on certain topic. But I think the idea of wanting to do something like this report was around for several years, actually, because we always wondered, how are other people actually doing this thing? How are other people facilitating, solving problems, which tools they are using, and all of these questions that we asked. And there are many questions we didn't ask just because we needed to make it reasonable length. All of these things were something that we had a hunch about, but wanted to quantify a bit more and get the conversation started. Because as we saw from the report, there are many things that are not prescribed in this very dynamic, very diverse field. And I think they open more questions than they give answers into the way of doing facilitation.
Can you elaborate a little bit more? What does it mean?
So I think having a technical background, I always draw parallel. And to some extent, this report was inspired by a lot of other reports I see in the tech community. And similarly there, when you say like a developer, similar to how we say a facilitator, it doesn't say much. Yeah, you are facilitating a process. You're getting somebody from point A to point B. You're probably working with people in a room or in online setting and something and using certain basic processes. But then everything else is so diverse. Actual tools you use, actual methods, formats of your session, all of those things are so varied that I think it would be challenging to say, okay, read this one book or take this one course, and then you're a facilitator, you're done. And I think this is what the report showed us as well. In a lot of places, other was the most common answer. There was no one prescribed or one best answer for the tool or method or any of those things. So I think in that way, if anybody comes to the report in hope of finding the best way to do something, they will not get that there. Mm. But I think anybody who is entering facilitation is probably aware of diversity already and will be inspired by all the options that they might discover in the report rather than finding one solution, one approach.
So what was the biggest surprise in the report, or what is the overall story of the report in a nutshell?
So the overall story, since this is the first one, we basically had questions like who are facilitators, what are they doing, and how do they do it, and what challenges they have. So if we reflect on those questions, the story is facilitators are spread around. They're everywhere. They are coming from various backgrounds. They are what we call or challenge are like they might be lonely in a way. I think that was one of the threads we saw in several questions. And even after the report came out and all the feedback we got on it, some were actually challenging this aspect, which is something we loved because we are not claiming this is how it is. It's just a perspective we've managed to get with our limited reach. And yeah, but this lonely facilitator is an interesting concept because what we see is often facilitation happens by one person. It's more dominant than having co-facilitators. And often independent facilitators, they're not part of organizations, at least the ones we reached. Again, we did have more than 1,000, but that's a fraction or a drop in the pond of all the facilitators in the world. So at least in our report, we got this sense that there is a lot of individuals who do this by themselves and have their own clients and so on. But the, let's say, challenge to that we got in feedback after the report was that actually, while those things are true, facilitators don't necessarily feel lonely because of this constant interaction with participants, with clients, with the community, the ones that are part of the community, so that there is actually never really a sense of loneliness, but rather of immense richness. And I can draw this parallel to teachers. I've been at the university and at some point maybe even considered having an academic career. And there I really enjoyed, and I to some extent now I think obviously I was having a facilitator role there as well, but I immensely enjoyed being in front of these students and every year getting new batch of students that bring new experiences to me as well. So it's not only me giving knowledge and education to them, but it's also them bringing their own perspectives and experiences which enriched me. So yeah, I think there is the lonely facilitators is more in ways of operation rather than feeling of loneliness.
And it's interesting that you got this challenging feedback because from what I heard, and I started the Never Done Before community for facilitators with something similar in mind, that yes, we are constantly with groups and we're creating this safe space and collaborative spirit for others, but we're always outside. Mm-hmm. And I think it at some point does feel lonely in the sense that who is creating the space for us? When are we getting to participate and actually play a little bit? And also, where can we get feedback and input, or maybe even an opportunity to test our own work before walking in front of a group? Yeah. And I think this makes it lonely. And
absolutely.
Having also worked in academia before, yes, we're constantly with students and with other colleagues, but at the end of the day, you're sitting there and planning your lecture yourself. You're sitting there and writing your paper alone.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. And I think that connects to the second learning out of, 7, 8 we had overall the report. And that's the community aspect where we saw, I think it was more than a quarter of participants not being part of any community, which is a big number in my opinion, because I think since facilitation is such a new thing and there are no strong established ways of educating yourself in facilitation, communities are at the moment, I think the best choice you have to become a better facilitator. You can read the books, you can learn from online resources that exist to some extent, but then practice is one way, and the other way is observing others. And both of those you can do through communities. A lot of communities I'm aware of do have ways of you to come to the community and practice a new method or a new approach or get feedback on it and observe how others are doing things. So yeah, I think there is a lot of work to be done there yet.
Yeah, 100%. And it's beautiful to observe how many new communities are actually emerging. And I would love to hear from your community as well, because I know that SessionLab, you also have started a community also with sessions, with community members hosting sessions.
Yeah.
Before getting there, though, I would like to come back to something else that you mentioned, is the co-facilitator. And I was actually quite surprised how small the number was of facilitators who stated to work with a co-facilitator.
Yeah.
And I was wondering where this is coming from. Did you get it?
Yeah, I don't think I can answer that question. We didn't have a question that could explain that, follow-up question related to that question. So I can only guess. And also through talking with other people like yourself who contributed to the report and helped analyze the results, I think the leading thought is it's about costs, because two facilitators usually cost more than one. And of 10 organizations already have hard time pricing facilitation, because often they see the 8 hours or 4 hours or whatever hours you stand in front of the audience, and everything else is a challenge for facilitators to price in all the work that needs to go to actually make this proper and bespoke and whatnot. So then on top of that, like, but why do I need two of you if you are good enough to deliver it? So I think that I would buy that explanation.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. This could be one. And I wonder whether with facilitators, and this might be provocative, maybe some in the audience would laugh or get angry. We have this with teachers as well, but I think teachers are very bad in collaboration, because they're so, and academics in general, we're so used to just define our own workflow, and we know better. In German, there's a joke that says, God knows everything and teachers know everything better.
Yeah.
And I somehow wonder, and I wouldn't exclude myself, whether for facilitators it's often the same. So if I have an idea of how the session should be, it's great to have input from others and to get a challenge. But at the end, when it comes to the final design, it's just faster doing it alone. And with a co-facilitator who's not, if you're not in sync, you need this kind of dance with a partner where you can throw the ball to each other. And that is not self-evident, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there is definitely something in that. And I immediately jumped back in a reflective way to moments in which I was co-facilitating and my partner was on the stage and I was in the background waiting for my turn, and they would say something and I would think like, oh, but I would say this differently, and you missed this opportunity to connect to that other point. So I think there is a bit of that in that for sure. And I think also maybe more so in facilitation, where you sort of need to build up your ego to actually be even able to stand in front of people and talk and lead them. So I think that maybe conflicts a bit with collaboration. But at the same time, or not at the same time, but another thing that came to my mind from what you were saying, it might be that people have not experienced co-facilitation at all, and don't even think that that's a thing that has any benefit, or maybe that doesn't even cross their mind. Because I think one thing that also comes out from the report is that a lot of people don't come to facilitation as, okay, I want to be a facilitator, tell me how to do it. And I think that's partially probably why you have that first question here at the podcast, because there is always an interesting story, and not I just went to college and I became a facilitator behind it. So if you are, I don't know, service designer and you're doing participatory workshops and you might have not considered that you can do that with somebody else and that you can split this responsibility and yeah.
Good point.
That's maybe something to bring back to communities too. Because often also what I see in communities is, okay, I have this method I want to try, I'm going to bring it, and then other facilitators come and feedback. But what if we challenge them and say like, okay, sure, who else from the community will co-facilitate with you? Let's do it like that. Let's try to sort of challenge people to co-facilitate with people that they have not done that before.
And it's actually funny that you're saying that, because for the festival, for the Never Done Before festival, we, air quotes, force our community members to pair up. So nobody is allowed to host a workshop alone.
That's awesome.
And initially they were like, oh, but I have this idea, I want to do it alone. But what it does, it brings the community closer together.
Yeah.
And everyone really learns something. And I think especially when it comes to creative workshops, two brains do think better than one. And it is a great way to just test whether we match with another co-facilitator.
Yeah.
Because I think then standing in front of a client is something totally different, as you said, especially when it comes to training and there are different ways of explaining things. You really have to be in sync and I think be able to actually drop the ego on the one hand, to invite the other, do you have something to add? But also to acknowledge that there is no perfect way to maybe explain or introduce it, and it will just be fine. And finally,
have you received any negative or less favorable feedback to that approach after the festival?
No. And I think it's biased, because those who end up facilitating together are those for whom it worked. So we did have some dropouts along the way.
Yeah.
If it just, sometimes you realize that it doesn't work and then you might give up. And then I think co-facilitation online is also different than co-facilitation on site.
Absolutely.
Where I almost don't do I don't do on-site facilitation anymore. I had the opportunity when I was in Australia recently to support two colleagues, Michelle and Reese. And we had such complements in the space because we had different energies, different perspectives, and the way how we worked the room together was just amazing. But it was a group of 250 people as well, so we needed some more eyes and arms. Yeah. What I just thought was you might be able to retrieve information whether most of the sessions are shared with someone or just owned by facilitator alone. Yeah,
we could do that. Obviously, if we would do anything like this, we would do it in a way of not compromising any privacy or anything like that. But I think immediately this would not really paint a good picture, because sometimes people have a shared account that they use. Everybody logs in with the same account, or they share the session with visitors, and then we don't know how to exactly differentiate who is a co-facilitator and who is just a visitor as a participant or client or anything like this. So I think there are challenges there.
Good point.
Yeah.
Would be interesting, though, if it was possible to cross-check the information about the co-facilitator. How many people work on a session design? It
would be. And I think we could do something, because you can assign specific blocks to people. So if you're using all the features or more of the features of SessionLab, then you might be doing that. I have two facilitators and you're doing this block, I'm doing this block, and so on. So that we could do. We could see how many sessions have more than one person assigned to a block. But again,
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that's why I said if. There are many things we see very expert facilitators not finding, which is our motivation to improve in the next year. I think we've built this product over the good part of 10 years, and some things are as they looked 10 years ago. So it's a bit of a time for an update.
Yeah, although there were many updates already in the recent month.
Yeah, that's the start of it only.
And there was another thing that I found interesting in what you mentioned, was that you mentioned service designers. And I think there are many, especially in the corporate world, people who do facilitate even as their main activity, but who wouldn't necessarily call themselves facilitators. And I'm thinking of Scrum Masters and Agile coaches and service designers. Were these also part of the report? Were they reflected in it? Or do you think that they are somewhere apart?
So I think they're definitely part of the report, because if we do look at the profession, we can definitely see that there are quite some people that identify as designers, 18%, and some type of managers, agile practitioners, 13%, and so on. So I think there is definitely those people that are in the report. The question is the number representative? And I don't think it is, because I think the ones that are in the report are the ones that we managed to reach, which majority are within our network. So they are the ones that have discovered SessionLab, SessionLab as a tool, or SessionLab as a resource, because we have the library, we have the newsletter, so we have other resources as contact points. And however, I think many, many more have not, because they don't really look for facilitation related content and tools, because they are not aware, as you said, that they are actually doing that. So I think one of the challenges for next year's and next reports is to expand on all of those areas we missed and try to get those people more. When promoting this report, I was actually sharing in all the communities that I was part of that are not facilitation communities. I'm part of design communities. I'm part of some leadership communities. And I was sharing everywhere where I truly believe that there is a significant amount of people that would and should identify as facilitators. But in general, this kind of sharing in communities did not bring a lot of people to answer 20-minute long surveys. So, yeah.
True. It's always, if you really identify as a facilitator and you're curious about the answers, then you would invest the time.
Yeah.
It just made me aware of that there are actually two groups of facilitators that are doing very different work. So, for instance, when I think of Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, design thinkers, service designers, who they follow a very clear method. So they are following a structure that is predefined. So most probably they don't redesign their sessions regularly because they apply the same thing. And then facilitation rather means managing group dynamics, getting the shy voices to speak, and these kind of things. Whereas other facilitators who are more into strategy or team building or ideation solution finding, they are looking into the activities and they might redesign the session from scratch each time.
Yes. And this is sort of also the realization we had when we rebranded, basically just changed the name, because trainers are often in the first category of people that don't change so much their process, because this is the training and this is what, usually the industry or whoever wants. So there is not much need for adopting, because that's what you're selling. You're selling a training, a curriculum, let's say, while facilitators are the ones that do more bespoke content. And then there is more this interaction around the design. But that all being said, for a long time, one of our bigger customers, maybe not even the biggest, was a Scrum team. So yeah, I think if done well, even prescribed processes can both benefit from a tool like SessionLab where it helps you guide you through the process as well, because it gives you the timing, it gives you things that you can interact with, because when you're delivering, even if you have a prescribed process, you might not stay on time and you might need to adjust, as well as probably evolve. Prescribed process just tells you more or less what are the rituals, but as your team and needs and experience grows, you're changing the minor details of that process.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and you can put in links and all the kind of notes of what you're actually delivering within these blocks. Yeah, it's all about are you a facilitator or are you facilitating? And I think for then the trainers, the Scrum Masters, who have a prescribed method, it's then the facilitation makes the difference in terms of mindset and how they deliver it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of the expertise of the domain that's more required in such case. And I wouldn't say that you need to know less about the dynamics, but I think, unfortunately, in practice, it often happens that, there might be trainers and people that do training because just they know most about the method, but know nothing about facilitation. And then we get university-style lecture with slides and no empathy and no understanding for different types of learning.
Totally. And I think this even happens in design thinking, for instance, where everyone believes, I have the prescribed method. I just need to go through it, and then totally forget that there's actually more than that. There's more than the activities.
What I would just give to designers, or at least if design thinking is done by somebody who went through design education, I think compared to classical engineering, at least, which is often what Scrum Masters end up, who end up being Scrum Masters are some type of engineers. At design, you at least learn more about empathy and about understanding the needs.
It's true.
Well, as engineers, at least when I went to school, we were not at all thought about that.
As long as the machine works and is running, it's all good.
Yeah.
The designers will take care of the rest.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. What was the biggest surprise for you from the
report?
Yeah.
This is a very personal one, and I guess if I might have given a thought to it, or maybe even just looked at our user base, maybe I would have seen this. But it was that there was such a representation of women, like 62%, I think, were women, which we have been given several interpretations of this. But for me, that was the biggest surprise.
So what are the different interpretations? I'm curious.
Well, I am slightly worried on not being the right person to talk about this, but there was this one that I think caused some as well interesting conversations after the report was published, but that facilitation is, from the social perspective, understood as a woman's profession, because it has more of this role of tending to the group's needs and support of the group.
Caring, nurturing.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So that's one of the interpretations. But I wonder to what extent this will be true when we expand beyond our current geographic reach. So when we reach into Asia more, and when we reach into Africa more, and when we reach into a non-English speaking regions, will this change? And in what direction?
Interesting. It's fascinating because, for instance, when I look at the podcast, I think that I have at least 50-50, if not more, male guests on the podcast who self-identify as facilitators. In the community, I think there are more female community members. And in the sessions, in the workshops, there are definitely more women showing up than men.
As participants, or?
As participants, yeah. So I wonder whether it is just a matter of visibility, that there might actually be as many male facilitators as females, especially in the Scrum and Lean and design thinking world, but that the female facilitators are maybe more outspoken, more visible on social media, more active in communities, and taking the time more to fill in a 20-minute survey.
Maybe. Yeah, that's a good guess. Yeah, I don't have a better answer there, or I think what I would be most curious is to see how this trend develops. And maybe that's something that we could explore through all the other communities that exist.
Yeah.
So yours, you already mentioned how it is, and I don't know the numbers for our community, but we could check there and then all other facilitation communities and see if this is confirmed, if the patterns are the same, and then open the conversation. I think there were already some conversations and workshops happening on this. So I would be very curious to understand that a bit more.
Yeah. And what I think is the beauty of the report, and you mentioned it in the beginning, that it's not the answer to all the questions, and it's not necessarily reflecting reality, but it's a beautiful conversation trigger, an opportunity to actually talk about all these things.
Yes.
Oh, why don't we work with co-facilitators? What's holding us back? Why do we see more women doing the work? And one aspect was also money. And I think that's, I'm always interested in the money part of facilitation, because I think we don't talk about it enough. What did you find out about rates of facilitation? Who charges most? Do men charge more than women? Maybe
that's an interesting.
And how much do we actually charge?
Yeah, I did spend some time digging into that data and trying to break it down in various ways. So if we just look at the basic distribution, then we don't really see any differences. But at the same time, statistically speaking, more women have given input than men. So I think there is some challenge in that data as well. So first, we only had one question. So I think it's very hard to draw any significant conclusion on this topic, because I mean, you yourself had a survey on pricing and had many more questions, and we looked at that when we were trying to figure out what to do in our survey, and concluded that to get a better answer, we would need to at least ask as many questions as you did, probably even more. So I think here the point is just about some general feeling of where things are. And when we break down the gender on the roles, so as I previously said, designer, consultant, coach, trainer, all the roles we had in our survey, then with almost each category, we do see men being favored in salary, and that's even to 20% favored over women. Now, again, a disclaimer here, studies have shown that men tend to over-represent a lot of things. So they might have rounded up while women might round down the number. So that might adjust for some of the things. But I think overall, it's very hard to bring the price of facilitation to one number, because it needs to take into account so many factors. And even with our prompt in the question of this type of workshop for these hours, for this many people, it was still like, okay, but it depends on the sector, it depends on the challenge, it depends on the group, it depends on so many other questions that we couldn't specify. So yeah, it's a very, very hard question to answer.
I feel an itch when I hear that men are compensated up to 20% more than women, because I think there's also something about the ask. I think that men tend to ask for more with more confidence.
Yeah, dare to ask for more. Yeah.
And who doesn't ask doesn't get.
Exactly.
So maybe if women would ask for higher rates, they would also get higher rates.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that it's a totally passive thing. But what are the numbers that you found for those who haven't read the report yet? So you asked for the compensation of an 8 hours on-site workshop?
Yeah, so it was, I can read it. So in-person, 1 day, 8-hour workshop with 15 participants. And assuming that the price includes preparation and follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
And the overall average was, let me just, I don't think we even wrote the overall average because it's so diverse, but North America, for instance, has the average of, or median of $3,500, while Western Europe and Australia and New Zealand have a median of 2,500. So this is already one very interesting difference for me.
Interesting, yeah.
Both of those areas would be called Western world, yet there is still so huge difference between perceived value of facilitation.
And I would be careful with that, because in the pricing survey that I ran, 2 years ago now,
mm-hmm.
we had similar results. So the US was about €1,000 or dollars more per workshop. And what we tend to forget is that if you're a freelancer in the US, you have, or even if you're not a freelancer, you have ways less social security. And
mm-hmm.
so everything in order to protect your job and to pay for all your living are much higher.
Yeah.
So usually the costs or the rates are much higher in the US just because you have to compensate for more.
Yeah. And that is a very good point. And I think it's often easily forgotten. I've seen these conversations in other industries as well. While at the same time, what becomes interesting is with online facilitation and everything, what we've seen, for instance, when hiring, especially when hiring in certain sectors like developers, this argument tends to not work so much anymore, because now, somebody from third world countries or not most developed countries who used to be cheaper outsourced labor suddenly realize I can work anywhere and I can do the same amount, same quality of work as the other guy. So why should I charge less if I can?
Yeah, so true. And then might be interesting for next time to ask the same question for online, because I would also think that in the US, or maybe it depends where are people actually located. If they host offsite workshops, are these in the bigger cities, and then the costs of living are higher?
Yeah.
And then it's very difficult to compare.
Exactly, yeah. I don't know to what extent we would want to focus on that, because we could ask 20 more questions and then get much better data. But I think we sort of have all these other things that we also want to ask.
Yeah.
So I would actually encourage you to repeat your survey.
I was just thinking, why? Maybe I can just relaunch it.
Yeah.
Because another thing is, and that's also just a thought, that in the US, you have more facilitators who actually facilitate for corporates, whereas in Europe and especially in Australia, many facilitators are in the social sector.
Mm-hmm. Let's confirm that in the report itself.
Ooh.
So in the report itself, we don't have a breakdown by country, and I would need to look into the original source. So I cannot do that instantly. Yeah. So, but I will get back to you on that afterwards.
Yeah, maybe you can put it in the show notes if you find the answer.
If you're curious about that, listeners, please check the show notes. I will definitely check it in the source data.
Awesome. Before we speak about the community, I always ask the same question. I would be curious to hear it from you. What makes a workshop fail?
Oh, so many things. Where to start? I think one thing I was taught as in one of the leadership trainings I went to was that, and I really took it to heart, that you as a leader, whatever you are leading, no matter who makes a mistake, it ultimately is also your fault. So you should always take a part of responsibility in whatever happens that's under your, let's say, leadership. And I think I would say a workshop fails probably because of facilitator, but I don't think that's something anybody should take as really a fault, just more as a reason to persist in learning and trying and educating, because there are so many challenges. So I would maybe rephrase that questions: where do facilitators fail that results in workshops failing? And I would say one thing is preparation, obviously. So the rule of thumb I've been taught of is at least 4 times the time you're going to spend with participants. At least 4 times more needs to be spent on preparation. And I think to some extent that's a stupid rule of thumb, because it really depends on complexity of the workshop
and experience.
Yeah. But I think to some extent there is some minimum of work you definitely need to do. You should never be too confident that you've done it hundreds of times, I can just do it without any preparation. Sure, you can, and you might be lucky. But if you want to remove the luck factor from there, then I think some preparation is always needed. And then I think the second is lacking the buy-in. So if the workshop is not honestly needed or honestly wanted by the client or participants. Sometimes clients think, okay, I'm just going to send them to a workshop or a training on this, and then everything will be fine. So I think, again, here in the facilitator has 2 options. One is to, during the preparation and during the understanding of the needs of the client, trying to ensure that, okay, what is the actual problem? If possible, I would always encourage that. I know it's super hard, but if possible, talk not only to the clients that are requesting the workshop, but also to those who are going to be part of the workshop, and understand their perspective. And if possible, come back to the client and say, okay, this is what you're saying. This is what I heard. How I propose this approach. I once facilitated the open space setup in an organization where they were really, really not used to any kind of such work. It was a very old-fashioned organization with hierarchies and whatnot. And the open space worked so well. There were so many ideas that came out to solve the problem that was given, and people felt so engaged. I think, they came in there hating their job, but knowing that's the only thing they have at the moment. And I think at the peak of the workshop, they were very excited and thought like, okay, maybe this can become a job I love. And then the boss came late, missed the whole introduction, came there and was like, why are we discussing these things? These are not problems. These are not issues. We should discuss this and this and this. And the whole thing fell apart. And I was not experienced enough to properly get out of that. So in the end, I felt I didn't do my job there. But I guess I should have made sure that the boss understands how this is going to work and accepts that whatever comes out of it is what probably needs to be dealt with because it came from everybody, not only from top. Yeah, so that would be the buy-in from the client and the participants to the process and to the acceptance of the outcomes as well. So not only the process. What else can we have? Yeah, I think then there are many things that can happen within the process itself, dealing with conflicts, dealing with tough situations with participants, technical issues, especially in the new post-COVID world.
Did you ask for challenges, for facilitation challenges in the report?
Yes, we did. Yes. We did. Let's take a look at that. So challenges, we had 2 questions. One was where we identified challenges we felt are common. And then the other where we gave open question to see if there is anything we missed and anything emerging above. And from the challenges that we gave, keeping up to date with the trends is number 1. And I think that goes in line with the lonely facilitator and with the lack of engagement in communities. I think
I was just thinking the same.
Whole connection of the main outcome. So I think, though, I also have to admit that joining a community is not enough. I am in so many communities And I just get this notification and emails that I don't have time to read. So I think active participation, and that all comes to how do you facilitate your life and your career as well. Mm-hmm. So as in facilitation of a workshop, that the same way in facilitation of your career, you need to sort of set goals. What are the goals you want to achieve maybe this year? And then, how do you achieve them? If it's being better and keeping up with the trends and growing as a facilitator, joining a community is one of the answers. But then don't join 20 communities and be overwhelmed and not participate in any, but choose one, commit to it to some extent of time and be active. And, don't run immediately to ChatGPT when you have a question, but maybe run to the community because you'll get less generic answer there and hopefully more humane one. And then join in the workshops and join in these things to see. Especially if this is your profession, then that should be included in the pricing, the cost of you spending that time to learn and to get better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's such a good one. And I think participating in workshops in communities helps us to just rebuild empathy to our participants. Because sometimes we forget how it is to be thrown out of our comfort zone and to be given some instructions that are not clear, finding ourselves in a breakout room, asking, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or a mirror board or a new tech that we don't know.
Yeah. And then the second challenge in the list, or the second most voted for, let's say, was getting the buy-in from stakeholders. So that's exactly the point I mentioned earlier. And then it's moving to hybrid, dealing with conflicts, finding clients, and so on. And similarly, or not similar, but in the other challenges, people mentioned getting the job. So this was open-ended answers, and we tried to categorize and label them somehow. So the first category we identified as the biggest, even though it's not huge, it's only 17%. It was this kind of getting the job, adequate pay, visibility. So that was more of this recognition both of the needs of facilitation and the value that facilitation brings to organizations.
Interesting. And how is it in your community? So what do you observe? Because I love what you just said, that it's not enough to just sign up for a community. And it reminds me very often of the books that I order. Mm-hmm. Just ordering the book is not enough. I still need to read it, and then I need to apply it. Right?
Yeah.
And with community, it's the same. And I advertise very clearly, okay, this is not a done for you community. You have, the more you put in, the more you get out. And I would assume that in my community, people are more active just because it's a paid one. Mm-hmm. How is it? What do you observe in your community? What are the trends, and do they match actually the outcomes of the report?
What outcomes of the report would I link them to? I'm not sure about the last part of the question. I think overall, when we talk about the report and discussion that we had around it in the community, I think overall it matched. People were not really challenging too much the outcomes. But I guess also to a great extent, those people were part of the survey as well. So not surprising there. As for the rest, I think the engagement is not as high as we would want it to be. I think we have very interesting events. And I think that's what at the moment gives the most value to participants. So we have, in a way, doubled down on that and want to do even more of these things. But having conversations outside of that still seems a bit slow, especially compared to how many people are in the community and how many people join the events. And then usually posts in the community itself don't get much reaction. I think there are various challenges there. Some might be just habits on this. Some might be the fact that these communities now, most of these communities that have emerged in the past few years are not on Facebook, they're not on LinkedIn, they're on these new platforms, and it's a bit habitual barrier to get into the new space and do something. it will be much easier if this comes into your feed in Facebook and then you just need to answer there. But I'm also part of some Facebook communities where I see a lot of questions, but not too many responses as well. So it's not always true, only that. So I think there is, and that's why I would double down on what I said before. Don't try to be in every single community and hope to get as much value from it, but rather commit to one or two. Because I think all of our communities have slightly different perspectives. So I'm not saying there is one better than the other one, but rather maybe observe. And then once you get the sense of which one fits you better, try to give back. At the same time, I think that this is not something that's going to drastically change. I think we see this in all the communities of practice that have existed much longer than ours, that in general, you will have a few very active people of the community and many who are just observing.
Yeah.
We can just try to do our best. And then there are other ways like yours to have it private, or not private, but paid for, which both brings more serious engagement and I guess increases the quality of that engagement. And it can be made into a maybe not paid, but privileged club where only certain kind of people that have connection with other people or whatever gamified setup can be done. And, maybe for some cases that could work, but we wanted to make it open for us. That's in line with our open library of content. And in general, from day one, our openness was a strong part of what we wanted to do in SessionLab, because we believed in this open sharing of knowledge, making the whole industry better.
Yeah. And I think you are making a huge contribution to that through the library, but also through the product that one can use for free. I think the free version covers a lot of things.
Yeah. The way we think about this, we are a business, so obviously we do need to somehow sustain both the tool and all the resources that go into creating the content we provide. So if we give you enough value as a professional, then you would hopefully get into the process where you would pay, but that would not, be a significant dent in your budget. While if you are doing this as occasional side project or side gig, then you should be satisfied with the free version of SessionLab for a while at least. And I think in that case, you will probably even get even more value from the content that's also fully open. Because if you're not doing this regularly, you might need refreshment or ideas on what to do in your workshops. So
yeah, and then it makes sense that the community is free and open. And I think there is also a difference in communities that are related to a product, because then it's a community of practice. They can also learn how to use the tool together and how to contribute.
Exactly. And we do have an aspect of that, obviously, since it is a SessionLab community. We didn't try to brand it differently or anything like that. But we are not putting main focus on that. There is area within the community where you can discuss product, and we occasionally have events where it's related to the product topic, but we are trying to give the value to those people that are not necessarily our users, or even if there are users, there is many more things about facilitation than using a tool.
Yes. So. Yes. Or even doing the activities. Right? Yeah. Wow. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you as well. And especially thank you for all the help with the report. I mean, you've provided feedback early on when we formed the questions, and you're one of the experts that gave insights. So it was really nice collaborating with you on that.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Was there anything that you would have liked to mention that we haven't touched upon yet? I haven't asked you for your number one challenge.
As in number one challenge when I'm facilitating?
Yeah. If you still facilitate.
So that's a good question. I definitely don't facilitate the same way I did before. And here I don't mean in terms of I grew so much or any of those things, but rather than as I now have this business to run, I facilitate mostly internally within our company. So that's from Christmas parties to design sprints and various such things. So definitely the aspect of, knowing your clients or participants is completely different now, as well as I was actually reflecting on this today, how as a internal facilitator in this context, I actually very rarely get a chance to be only a facilitator. And I think that's not ideal. I think it would be better if I was not wearing also the owner or any other hat that I might be wearing at that moment, because it does sometimes distract me from focus. Not too much, I hope, but I know that sometimes I know the most about certain topic that we talk about because maybe it's very technical or maybe I've done it in the past and so on. So I need to jump in and contribute instead of just guiding the conversation. So then at the same time, I need to talk, but also facilitate myself. That I don't talk too much or that I don't influence too much or that I give space. So that's one of the challenges. And whenever we can, we actually love to work with other facilitators when we have our retreats and when we have our even online. We've done several workshops when we had the need of something. Sometimes it's obviously because we are not experts on the topic, but sometimes it's just because it's so much easier and better and to have somebody external to just guide us. And we all, both my co-founder and I, can feel full engagement.
Yeah, and participate and don't have to be neutral.
Yeah, exactly. So what is the biggest challenge I have now? So I think because of that change, probably that is one of the challenges of wearing too many hats and not being able to fully only facilitate. Is that the biggest one, though? I'm not sure that's the biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge might be the number one thing I said as leading to failure. And that's, I never feel like I've put enough time in the preparation. I never feel I have enough time to put in the preparation. So I think I always, I tend to prepare to some extent and then prepare a lot just before the workshop. Sometimes meaning not sleeping much the night before, which if it's only 1 day workshop actually energizes me a lot, but then I crash the day after. And I think even with that, last burst of preparation and trying to add more despite lack of time, I'm never fully satisfied. But I don't know if I ever would be. I think that's part of the, everlasting desire to grow and be better and do more. So I don't think it has yet led to workshops I would call a failure, but I think they have not reached their full potential, let's say.
Thank you. I think that many can relate to that, me included. Yeah. But then it's also a trade-off, because especially for a workshop with all the dynamics, you can never be prepared for what's happening.
Yeah.
Because you don't know, you don't control it.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I envy you and all the friends and colleagues I have that facilitate more often, because that gives you a bit of edge and advantage in the terms of even if you spend the same amount of time preparing as maybe I do, you at least have this, like, you're warmed up, your engine is already running. Well, I always need to boot it up first.
Yeah, that's true. And especially with the community I've never done before, I think I can come up with a workshop design in an hour and just run it and see what happens.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's like a muscle that I've been training.
Yeah.
Quite intensively.
I'm looking forward to the moment when I can step away from certain roles within the company and maybe get back into the facilitation world a bit more, or let's say in the practice of the facilitation a bit more, because I'm definitely very much in that world at the moment.
Yeah, it is fun. Beautiful. Last question, very last. What would you consider the future of facilitation?
Future of facilitation. I think future of facilitation is a combination of tools or new or improved tools. And here I'm thinking, digital tools, not methods themselves, but digital and maybe non-digital tools that are there to maybe be one of the co-facilitators, but are less intrusive in a way. I think technology has really had a major advancement over the last decades. I mean, all the time, just months now, if we talk about the AI, huge change. And yet, I think a lot of it is still, you need to think about it. You need to think about setting up this Zoom meeting, and you need to think about microphone being on and camera being well placed. And you need to think about in live presence, you need to think about if you're projecting something or if you're recording in any way, or there are a lot of things that technology is doing well, but requires you to keep it at the top or close to the top of your mind. So I think the future is equal or more help in terms of what technology brings, but without this overhead of thinking about it. So it's seamless. It is really there to help and not hinder the process in any way.
Yeah.
So this is more a technocratic look at the future. I think in the other way or the other perspective is, I think facilitation already is almost everywhere, or it's very, very present. As Douglas wrote in the report, facilitation is everywhere. But I think it's not getting the recognition it needs. And I think we talked about people doing facilitation but not being aware, or people actually having facilitation role but not facilitating properly. Question is, can you not facilitate, or is even bad facilitation? So depending on where you look at that, I think changing in this perception is hopefully future. I don't know how close though, because I think a lot of things need to happen there. Education needs to step up. I think we are seeing a lot of emerging of facilitation courses, often connected to various communities or agencies. And I think that's good. I wonder what is the future of education in general, being somebody with academic background, but also stepping out of academia. One of the reasons was because I found a lot of things there not working well. And yet universities are here and people still go there. So can they catch up? Can we have more formal education here? Do we need it? That's also a question. Does it need to be formalized, or should it be part of every education? That facilitation is something you need to learn about.
Interesting questions. Yeah. More questions than answers.
Yes. That's the future.
Yeah. I can relate to that, especially also with the first part, to have more technology that helps us to actually free head space to be more creative and more present in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, education. Hopefully facilitation will be part of, I hope, part of an MBA program, part of business education, managers education, teachers education.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
To be fair, I think aspects of facilitation already are. I've not done MBA myself, but I would think that a lot of what we talk about, group dynamics and so on, must be part of some leadership, at least good leadership training. So I wonder, what do we need here? Do we need to label those things as facilitation skills so that the practice of facilitation gets more value? And, does it need to be a facilitation course within MBA? Or is it just about recognizing that all of these techniques fall under this one umbrella? And if you're practicing that in any way, this is what you should be looking for.
Yeah. Good food for thought.
Yes.
Thank you, Filip.
Thank you as well.
It was a pleasure to speak with you, and I will put all the links in the show notes.
Yeah, and I still need to answer that question about sector and distribution per country.
Yes.
Or at least continent.
You remember. Awesome. Yeah. So yes. Talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a great day and weekend ahead.
You too. Thank you for staying tuned and for listening to the show. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate that you're sharing your two most valuable resources with me and my guest, your time and your attention. If you're looking for more conversation with other facilitators and for a community of practice, why don't you join Never Done Before, the community that I have built, and many of my podcast guests are already members. Visit neverdonebefore.org, and I wish to see you there.